They say that a woman's heart is a deep ocean of secrets, but for Elena, Duchess of Rothwell, it was more like a frozen lake, chilled by the neglect of a husband who saw only the dull surface and never the fire burning beneath. Imagine being cast aside on your second anniversary, told you are as forgettable as the Yorkshire fog, only to return 2 years later, masked in diamonds and holding the very keys to your husband's ruin. This is not a fairy tale of a damsel in distress. It is the story of a woman who was forged in the cold, rose from the ashes of a broken marriage, and returned to claim not just an apology, but an empire. Before we begin this journey into the glittering ballrooms and shadowed hearts of Regency London, please take a moment to subscribe and like this story. I would love to hear in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what historical era should we explore next? Chapter 1. The Marriage of Lead and Ice. The rain in London did not fall, it wept. It streaked against the tall, arched windows of Mayfair House, blurring the street lamps of Mayfair into smudged yellow bruises against the night. Inside the Duke's study, the air was thick with the scent of expensive brandy and the suffocating silence of a dying marriage. Elena stood by the fireplace, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wore a gown of dove-grey silk, the colour Alistair had once remarked was serviceable. She had spent 2 years trying to be serviceable. She had been the quiet shadow at his side, the Duchess who never raised her voice, the woman who practiced her embroidery until her fingers bled, all to please a man who looked through her as if she were made of glass. Alistair, the Duke of Rothwell, sat behind his mahogany desk, his handsome face set in lines of weary frustration. He was a man built of marble and moonlight, striking, cold, and utterly unreachable. "It is for the best, Elena," he said, his voice devoid of the passion she so desperately craved. "The ton," they whisper. They see you at these galas, standing like a statue, offering nothing but platitudes. You are unhappy here, and frankly, your presence is a reminder of a match that has brought neither of us any joy." Elena felt a sharp, icy needle pierce her chest. "I have tried, Alistair. I have been everything you asked." "And that is the problem," he snapped, finally looking up. His blue eyes, usually so piercing, were dull. "You are as dull as the Yorkshire fog, Elena. There is no spark, no wit, no life. I require a wife who can command a room, not one who disappears into the wallpaper." He stood, walking to the window to avoid her gaze. "I have decided. You will relocate to Blackwood Manor. It is remote, yes, but it is quiet. You can live among the sheep and the hills. You belong there, in the silence. I will provide a modest allowance, and we shall live our lives apart. It is more than most discarded wives receive." Discarded. The word echoed in the cavernous room. Elena didn't cry. The tears had dried up months ago, somewhere between the 3rd and 4th time he'd forgotten her birthday. "I see, Alistair. You find me plain, Alistair, boring, a burden to your reputation." "I find you insufficient," he replied cruelly. The next morning, with only 3 trunks and a heart turned to stone, Eleanor was sent away. As the carriage jolted over the cobblestones, leaving the spires of London behind, she looked back at Rothwell House. She had entered those doors a hopeful bride. She left them a ghost. But the Duke had made one grave mistake. He had assumed that because she was quiet, she was empty. He had assumed that because she was plain, she was powerless. Blackwood Manor was a crumbling heap of grey stone on the edge of the moors, smelling of damp earth and ancient secrets. It was here, amidst the dust of a forgotten library, that Elena found her father's true legacy. Everyone believed Thomas Montfort had died a failed merchant, his wealth dissipated into bad shipping ventures. But as Elena pored over the hidden ledgers tucked behind the false back of his old travelling desk, the truth began to emerge, in ink and gold. Her father hadn't lost his money, he had hidden it. He had built a labyrinth of trusts and offshore holdings, a global banking conglomerate known in the shadows of the Bourse and the Royal Exchange as the House of Montfort. And she was the sole heir. As the wind howled across the Yorkshire moors, Elena felt something stir within her, a spark that Alistair had tried to smother. She realized she didn't need a duke to give her a life. She had the means to buy and sell every duke in England. For 2 years the world forgot Elena Rothwell. She did not stay at Blackwood. Using her newfound wealth, she travelled under a series of assumed names. In Paris, she shed the grey silk and learned the art of the salon from the most brilliant wits of the continent. In Florence, she studied the movements of markets and the power of leverage. She replaced her serviceable wardrobe with velvets that felt like sin and silks that shimmered like moonlight. She became the invisible hand, a mysterious financier whose movements dictated the rise and fall of interest rates from London to Vienna. She learned to speak with the authority of a queen and the subtlety of a spy. She was no longer the plain wife. She was a woman of fire, waiting for the right moment to burn the world that had rejected her. Meanwhile, back in London, rumours began to swell. The Duke of Rothwell was faltering, his investments in the canal schemes had soured, his lavish lifestyle and his mother's gambling debts were dragging the estate into the abyss. He was a lion in a gilded cage, starving for resources. Elena sat in a café in Venice, reading the London Gazettes. She saw the notice for the Duke's upcoming Masquerade, a desperate attempt to woo new investors and perhaps find a wealthy mistress to salvage his pride. She smiled, a slow, predatory curve of the lips. "It is time," she whispered to the empty air. "The fog is lifting, Alistair, and you won't like what you see behind it." Chapter 2: The Golden Shadow at the Ball. The ballroom of Rothwell House was a kaleidoscope of desperation masked by silk and candlelight. To the Tan, it was the social event of the season, a night of mystery and decadence. To Alistair, the Duke of Rothwell, it was a funeral pyre. Every crystal chandelier that glittered above, every bottle of vintage champagne being poured, and every note played by the orchestra was a debt he could no longer afford to pay. He stood at the edge of the dance floor, a black velvet mask covering the upper half of his face, though it did little to hide the weariness in his eyes. He had spent the last hour dodging creditors disguised as guests and smiling at heiresses he had no intention of marrying. His mind, unbidden, kept drifting back to the grey house on the moors. He found himself wondering if it was raining in Yorkshire and if Elena was sitting by a fire, safe and dull, far away from the wreckage he had made of his life. "You look as though you're attending a hanging, Alistair," his mother, the Dowager Duchess, hissed in his ear, her fan snapping shut like a pistol shot. "Smile, we need the interest of the baronet or the widow from Sussex. If you don't secure a benefactor tonight, the Rothwell name will be nothing but a footnote in a bankruptcy ledger." "I am aware of our precarious position, mother," Alistair replied, his voice tight. "But I find I have little stomach for the hunt tonight." Suddenly, the music faltered. A ripple of silence spread from the grand entrance like a wave, drowning out the chatter of the crowd. Even the Dowager stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening. The doors had swung open to reveal a woman who seemed to have been forged from the sun itself. She wore a gown of liquid gold that clung to a figure Alistair didn't recognize, shimmering with every breath she took. A mantle of sheer, gossamer silk trailed behind her like the wings of a fallen angel. But it was her mask that stole the breath from the room, a masterpiece of intricate silver lace encrusted entirely with diamonds that caught the candlelight and shattered it into 1,000 dancing stars. She did not wait to be announced. She moved with a predatory grace, a confidence that suggested she didn't just belong in the room, she owned the air within it. "Who is she?" The whispers rose like a fever. "The Gilded Siren," someone breathed. Alistair felt a strange electric jolt in his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. He watched, mesmerized, as she navigated the crowd. She didn't head for the buffet or the champagne. She walked straight toward him. Every man in the room watched her, but her eyes, dark and burning behind the diamonds, were fixed solely on the Duke. "Your Grace," she said, her voice a low, melodic thrum that vibrated in his very bones. It was a voice that sounded like velvet and tasted like smoke. "I believe you are looking for someone to save you." Alistair bowed, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I believe I am looking for a dance, madam, though I suspect you are far too dangerous for a simple waltz." "Danger is merely a matter of perspective," she replied, placing a gloved hand in his. As the orchestra struck up a haunting minor key waltz, Alistair led her onto the floor. The moment he touched her waist, the world outside the circle of their dance vanished. She moved with a fluidity that was intoxicating, her scent, something exotic, like jasmine and sea salt, filling his senses. "You speak as though you know me," Alistair murmured, pulling her a fraction closer than propriety allowed. "I know the Duke of Rothwell," she said, her tone laced with a hint of irony. "The man who has everything and values nothing. I hear the shadows of this house a whispering of ruin." Alistair stiffened, but he didn't pull away. There was something about her, an intensity, a fire, that beckoned him to be honest in a way he never had been with anyone. "The shadows are not wrong. I have been a fool. I spent my life chasing ghosts and status, only to realize I've built my house on sand." He looked down at her, his gaze searching the diamond mask. "I once had a wife, a steady, quiet woman. I sent her away because I thought she was insufficient. I thought I needed more brilliance, more noise. Now, standing in the ruins of my own making, I realized she was the only real thing I ever had. I threw away the moon while reaching for the stars, and now I am left in the dark." The Gilded Siren paused for a heartbeat, her hand tightening slightly on his shoulder. "And if she were here now, would you tell her that?" "I would tell her I am a failure," Alistair whispered, his voice cracking with a raw, uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I would tell her that I have spent the last 2 years writing letters I was too cowardly to send, begging for a forgiveness I don't deserve." The woman pulled back slightly, her breath hitching. "Letters?" "Every week," Alistair admitted, the yearning thick in his throat. "I sent them to the Grey House. I told her about the gardens, about the silence of this house without her. I told her I was wrong, but she never answered, not once. I suppose she finally found the peace I promised her, the peace that comes from forgetting I ever existed." The Gilded Siren went very still. The diamond mask shimmered as she tilted her head, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the music like a blade. "Perhaps, Your Grace, the letters never arrived, Or perhaps she was busy becoming someone you no longer recognize. Alistair frowned, a sense of unease creeping over him. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, her voice turning from silk to steel, "that the plain girl you left in the fog is dead, and the woman who has returned is far more expensive than you can afford." Before he could respond, she pulled away, the dance ending as the final note echoed through the hall. She began to move toward the center of the ballroom, where the Dowager Duchess stood watching with narrowed, suspicious eyes. Alistair followed, his pulse racing. "Wait, who are you?" The woman stopped and turned. The entire room went still as she reached for the silk ribbons at the back of her head. "You want to know who holds your fate, Alistair?" she asked, her voice ringing out with a power that commanded every soul in the room to listen. "You want to know who bought your debts and holds the deed to every stone of this estate?" She pulled the ribbon. The diamond mask fell away, hitting the marble floor with a melodic chime. The room gasped. Alistair felt the blood drain from his face, his knees nearly buckling. It was Elena. But it wasn't the Elena he knew. Gone was the mousy, grey-clad girl with the downcast eyes. Standing before him was a goddess of gold and fire, her gaze leveled at him with the cold, calculating precision of a sovereign. "I am Elena Montfort," she declared, her voice echoing off the high ceilings, "and I have come to collect what is mine." The silence in the ballroom was so absolute that the flickering of the candles seemed to roar. Alistair stared at the woman before him, his breath hitching in a throat that felt suddenly constricted. This was not the ghost he had haunted for 2 years. This was a queen who had returned to claim a kingdom she had already conquered in the dark. "Elena," he whispered, the name tasting like a prayer and a confession. "The same," she replied, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed a glimmer of the fire that had forged her in exile. Before Alistair could step forward, a sharp, cold voice cut through the tension. "This is preposterous." The Dowager Duchess marched towards them, her silk skirts hissing like a viper. "You, the plain little thing we sent to the moors? This is some masquerade trickery. You are a common girl playing at being a sovereign." Elena turned her gaze toward her mother-in-law. It was a look of such profound indifference that the Dowager actually recoiled. "I am no longer the girl you bullied into silence, Mother, and I certainly didn't come here to play." Elena reached into a small velvet-lined reticule at her waist and pulled out a single heavy parchment sealed with the crest of the House of Montfort. She didn't look at the Dowager, she looked at Alistair. "You mentioned letters, Alistair," Elena said softly. "You said you wrote every week for 2 years. You said you begged for forgiveness I never gave." Alistair nodded, his face pale. "I did. I sent them via the Rothwell couriers. I told you I was a fool. I told you I loved you when it was too late to say it." "I never received a single word," Elena said. "Not one letter reached the Grey House. I lived in a silence so thick it nearly broke me, believing that the man I had given my heart to truly found me insufficient, even for a memory." Alistair's head whipped around to his mother. The Dowager's face had gone from pale to a mottled, sickly grey. "Mother, it was for your own good," the Dowager shrieked, the mask of nobility finally cracking. "She was a merchant's daughter. You needed a woman of blood, a woman who could secure the Rothwell legacy, not a girl who spent her days reading ledgers. I burned them. I burned every pathetic word you wrote to that creature." The betrayal hit Alistair like a physical blow. He looked at his mother as if seeing a stranger, then back at Elena. The weight of 2 wasted years, of 2 years of mutual, silent agony, crashed down upon them both. "But it doesn't matter now," Elena continued, her voice gaining a metallic edge, "because while you were burning letters, I was buying legacies. Alistair, the House of Montfort, my father's house, does not just lend money. We own the debt of those who cannot pay. And tonight I am here to inform you that your creditors have sold your soul to me." She stepped closer, the liquid gold of her gown shimmering. "You owe £18,000 to the House of Montfort. You have defaulted on the interest. By the laws of this land, the Rothwell estates, this house, and every acre of Yorkshire land you own now belong to me." The room erupted in a fresh wave of gasps. The Duke of Rothwell, one of the most powerful men in England, was now technically a tenant of his own wife. Alistair didn't argue. He didn't shout. He looked at the woman he had once dismissed as dull, and he saw a brilliance that blinded him. He saw the strength he had been too weak to possess. Slow and deliberate, Alistair did something that sent a shockwave through the ton. He dropped to one knee. He didn't do it for the audience. He did it for her. He took her hand, the hand of the woman who held his ruin in her palm, and pressed a lingering, desperate kiss to her knuckles. "Then take it," he whispered, loud enough only for her. "Take the title, take the land, take the keys. I have lived for 2 years as a duke and felt like a beggar. I would rather be your steward, your servant, your shadow, anything so long as I am no longer without you." Elena's composure wavered for the first time. The steel in her gaze softened into something that looked suspiciously like the yearning she had hidden for so long. She saw the man he had become, not the arrogant boy who had sent her away, but a man humbled by his own mistakes, a man finally brave enough to be led by a woman. "I didn't come for an apology, Alistair," she murmured, reaching out to tilt his chin up so he had to meet her eyes. "I came to see if there was anything left of the man I married. It seems he was merely buried under a great deal of lead." She looked out at the room, at the stunned faces of the aristocracy, and then back to her husband. "Keep your title, Alistair. The world needs a Duke of Rothwell. But this house, this empire, it will be a partnership. I will manage the gold, and you will manage the legacy, and your mother will be leaving for the dower house in Scotland by morning." Alistair stood, his hand finding her waist, not as a master, but as a partner. The silence that had once defined their marriage was gone, replaced by an electric understanding that didn't need words. And so the plain wife who was once sent to live among the sheep became the most powerful woman in London. They stayed in the city, but the Rothwell house was no longer a place of ice and shadows. It became a beacon of wit, power, and a love that was forged not in the safety of a fairy tale, but in the fires of betrayal and the truth of redemption. Alistair never did find his wife dull again, for in the years that followed he learned that the most beautiful things in life are rarely the loudest. They are the ones that have the strength to wait for the fog to clear and the fire to rise.